I don't know what to do. The past few weeks of my life have been filled with strange occurrences, and to this day, I'm still unable to answer all the questions I have about these events. And all of these strange events were tied to my brother Lewis. My name is Henry Madison, and I'm currently living in a house in Ravenfield. I'm a car salesman, and every day, I would leave the house to attempt to sell a second-hand car to some gullible customer who would believe anything I would tell them about the good car that was anything but, so that I could earn a few bucks to support myself. I have always lived alone in my house, but up until a few weeks ago, my brother was staying in the same house as me. My brother had a troubled life. I was about 10 years older than him, but I still had the opportunity to take care of him before I left for Ravenfield to work. As a result, I think that he might have loved me even more than our parents, considering I was there for him more than our parents were, due to the excess of spare time that I had after school every day. I think my sudden departure to Ravenfield severely affected him, and in the months following my departure, he became more separated from his school friends, and even our own parents, who would often frantically call me, telling me to return back home to try and control my brother. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough time to return home due to work-related issues, and I think that that was what made his attitude and behavior become even worse as the years went by. When he started high school, my brother found and joined a cult group who were focused on purity and whatnot, and like other notorious cults, the cult eventually started to do questionable actions. I think they kidnapped and murdered a powerful rich guy, forcing the authorities to act and forcefully dismantle the cult, stranding the members who weren't entirely driven insane by the cult at that point, like my brother. As he didn't play a major role in organizing the crimes that were performed by the cult, he was only imprisoned for a short period of time before being released. By that time, my parents were already prepared to force him to stay with me, and they claimed that since he listens to me the most, he would not cause any more trouble if I was around him, or kept an eye on him. And so the month after his release, which occurred last year, he arrived at my doorstep, eager to see his dear older brother again. Well, I think I can say that my parents were right. Even though I had fears about his potential cult fantasies for the first few months since he arrived, he had successfully not run into any trouble at all for the first few months. He just secured a part-time job at the supermarket, and I believe that if he had continued living the life he was living, he could lead a healthy life with no other incidents whatsoever, and he could put all that cult nonsense behind him. Well, that was until he started receiving calls from someone. My brother always had one of those second-hand phones similar to the old Nokia phones that were only meant for calls, messages, playing old games, and nothing else. That suited him, as he couldn't care less about WhatsApp or Facebook, or other social media apps. After all, other than his cult fanatic friends, who were probably dead, he didn't really have anyone he was close to, apart from me or my parents. Perhaps this was primarily the reason why I was curious about his recent activities. Since the first day I noticed, my brother had continuously locked himself in his own room every single day, refusing to go to work or go anywhere else. He just stayed in his room all day for hours at a time, only choosing to come out at night, and even then, he just left the house in the wee hours of the night, only returning to the house after daybreak. In the rare times that he left his room during the day, and I wasn't at work, he was always frantically pacing around the living room or the kitchen, continuously checking his phone, and when it eventually lit up, signifying that someone was calling him, he eagerly answered the phone and immediately retreated back to his room, locking it behind him again. Of course, I was naturally concerned about his actions, being his close brother and all. His unusual actions were beginning to impact his behavior and appearance. Eye bags had slowly started to appear on his face, and he was looking skinnier and paler than when we first reunited with each other. He also became more irritable and easily provoked, and I knew that something was very wrong after he randomly shouted at me for no reason at all one day. He adamantly refused to let me into his room, even when I wanted to clean it for him, and he claimed that I shouldn't know what he was doing in his room. I tried to ask him who he was talking to, or where he was going every night, but he always ignored the question. And in the times when I forced him to answer the question, which was simply achieved when I took his phone away from him, but it didn't last very long, as after that he threatened to kill me if I took his phone away from him again. He simply muttered in a low voice that he had a girlfriend, and that he changed his shifts in the supermarket because he worked better in the night. Now, I knew for a fact that that wasn't true at all, because I never once saw him go out with a girl, and I heard from the supermarket that he quit by his own accord. Naturally, I assumed that he had somehow, for some reason, rejoined the cult, or maybe even formed a new one, and with that as a basis, I reported him to the authorities, and he was monitored. However, something was off. If he was indeed in another cult, why hadn't he left the house to join them already, I thought. In addition to this, during the monitoring, the authorities didn't find any clear evidence linking him to any new cult. In fact, they were also puzzled, as they claimed that when he left the house every night, and they began to track his movements, he just disappeared after a certain point. Like literally vanished into thin air, out of sight, with him only reappearing the next day. As a result, they were forced to drop the investigation after a few futile attempts at trying to find where he went or vanished to. But I couldn't give up. As his brother, I needed to find out who he was talking to on his phone, so that I could stop this. Well, I eventually found who or what he was talking to. A few days after the authorities were forced to drop the investigation, I finally convinced him to take a shower, and he reluctantly left his phone behind a shower. As he was showering, I was hovering near his phone, hoping to catch whoever was calling him in the act. Maybe I could record the number and send it to the authorities, I thought, hoping to finally end this once and for all. Out of pure chance, the phone suddenly buzzed. I eagerly picked it up, hoping to finally get the culprit's number. However, the number that I saw could not have been a real number. It was a jumble of letters and numbers, and it was so long that I couldn't have possibly remembered it. Despite this, I couldn't let my effort go to waste. I answered the call. The call first began as a series of crackles and pops. "Hello?" I whispered quietly into the mouthpiece. Silence. Suddenly, my ears were blasted by a high-pitched ringing, causing me to drop the phone on the floor in surprise. At that point, one part of me was assuming that it was a large prank organized by my brother, but the other part knew that that was not the case, and that something was definitely wrong. I reached out to pick up the phone from the floor, and I saw that the call still hadn't ended. Instinctively, I grabbed a notebook and pen, hoping to at least catch what the person on the other line was saying, any words or whatever that I could still use as evidence to give to the authorities. But the person wasn't saying any words. It was repeating a set of numbers. Like most of the number stations that I had heard of before in the news, the numbers were being recited by a female in a monotonous robotic voice, and the same set of numbers were being repeated after a short interval. I copied down the numbers on my notepad, and it roughly came out as something like this. I was pretty weirded out at this point, and as I heard the sound of running water stop, I quickly ended the call and placed the phone back on the table, hoping my brother wasn't going to know that I interrupted his conversation. Thankfully, he didn't, and he just took his phone back without so much as a mutter or grunt, and as he shuffled back towards his room, I breathed a sigh of relief and immediately made plans to give the recorded note to the authorities. I eventually did, and after pondering over the note and asking me a few questions to prove my reliability, the authorities said that they would try to decipher the note to try and find the culprit, and I thanked them as I left the station. That night, my brother began to look increasingly worried, and he kept frantically pacing around the living room, looking at his phone. At that point, I realized that my intervention had prevented him from getting whatever he needed to get from that female. Half of me wanted to give him the note with the numbers on it, but the other half of me knew that he would not respond very kindly to that, and so I kept quiet. After a few hours, I got ready for bed. I knew that at that point, my brother didn't know what to do now, and now he couldn't leave the house without his information, and so I left him, just frantically pacing around, still looking desperately at his phone. "Make sure you don't stay up too late," I warned him. He gave no reply. I shrugged and went to sleep. The next day when I awoke, I realized that something was off. Usually, when my brother returned from his nocturnal journey, he would slam the door as an indication that he had returned, which would tend to wake me up. However, I didn't hear anything when I woke up. Initially, I assumed that my plan had worked, and that he went to sleep after not knowing what to do. However, I saw a note on the table that proved otherwise. This note was also full of numbers. It was scribbled very hastily, almost like it was written down in a frenzy. I picked up the note and was vaguely able to make out what it said. There was no sign of him or his phone anywhere, and a sense of dread began to crawl inside me. I disrupted the message. I prevented him from seeing the message. I sent it to the authorities, and now, even though it was morning, he was still missing. I did this. I tried to call him, but I was just met with a dial tone. I informed the officers and my friends that my brother had gone missing, and they organized a massive manhunt for him, and I tagged along, sincerely hoping that he would eventually return one day and tell me what he had been through. Unfortunately, that was a few weeks ago, and I haven't seen him since. The manhunt has already ended with a failure. The deciphering has turned up no conclusions, and the authorities are now declaring him as presumably dead. My parents and I will be attending his funeral on Friday. But I know that he is not dead, and that he is still alive. The day the manhunt ended, I went to his room, the one I was told not to enter, and as I opened the door, I was greeted with a shocking sight. Hundreds of papers were scattered on his bed, on his table, and on the floor, all covered in numbers. As I picked through the mess and gathered up all the papers, I noticed an envelope on the table. I picked it up, and here is what it said. To Henry, my brother. I know you reported us to the authorities. I know you heard one of the messages. And now, we are hiding because of you. But I don't blame you. I know I have been a nuisance to you, and trust me, I know you do care about me, and I love you for that. However, do know that me leaving is the best solution for both of us. I can be happy, and you don't have to worry about me anymore. I'm content with where I am, and I'm happy. So please, I want you to forget about me. Treat me as a memory, and we can both move on. Please. Your brother, always, Lewis. I'm writing this to you guys now so that you can know what I've been through and how content my brother really was at the end. Now, I'm still deciphering the numbers, so I still have a lot of questions. Is he really safe? Who are they? And what do they want? To this day, I'm still unable to. My phone just started buzzing. The call isn't coming from my parents or from the police, but I know that jumble of letters and numbers well. I'm going to answer it. After I post my experience for you guys to read, I'm going to answer it. Hopefully I can ask them what exactly happened to my brother. They can answer my question truthfully. I hope I can get an answer. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you want to see more, let me know in the comments below, and tell me what you thought of this narration. Make sure to follow me on Twitter for updates, and if you'd like to get early videos, shoutouts, and much more, I'd appreciate it if you check out my Patreon page. It's a place where you can help support my channel while getting awesome rewards in the process, and every pledge helps out a ton, no matter the size. So if you'd like to see all the rewards I offer and consider becoming a patron, it'd mean a ton to me if you'd click the link in the description and just check it out. And don't forget to show some love to the amazingly talented authors who make these narrations possible. Have a good night, everybody. Cheers.